Open your banking app and look at the numbers. If that sentence just triggered a cold spike of dread in your chest, you aren't alone. You know the balance is lower than it should be, so instead of looking, you simply close the tab or swipe the notification away. You tell yourself that ignoring the data will lower your anxiety, but in reality, you are paying a massive, invisible avoidance tax. This is the ostrich effect, a psychological bias where we bury our heads in the sand to avoid information we perceive as negative. While this might provide a few minutes of temporary comfort, it is a systematic destroyer of long-term wealth, because you cannot fix a leak you refuse to see. The ostrich effect is not a sign of laziness or a lack of character. It is a defensive reflex of the emotional brain. When we face financial stress, our brain perceives a low bank balance as a literal threat to our survival. The amygdala, the ancient part of your brain responsible for the fight or flight response, doesn't distinguish between a predatory animal and a predatory credit card statement. To protect you from the pain of that realization, it triggers a state of active denial. We stop checking our accounts, we ignore the overdue emails, and we stop tracking our daily spending because the act of knowing feels like an attack. We believe that if we don't acknowledge the problem, it doesn't truly exist. But money is objective math, not subjective emotion. While you are hiding, the interest is compounding, the late fees are stacking, and your small leaks are transforming into total insolvency. Marketers and subscription-based companies rely on your ostrich effect to keep their profits high. This is what's known as inertia marketing. They know that once a recurring payment is set up, the friction of checking a statement is high enough that most people will simply avoid it to prevent a spike in cortisol. You might be paying for 3 different streaming services you never watch, or a high-interest protection plan you don't need. Because you've buried your head in the sand, these companies have a permanent legal straw in your bank account. They aren't stealing your money, you are handing it to them as a fee for your own cognitive denial. Over a year, these invisible leaks can easily total over $2,000. This is capital that could have been growing in your brokerage account, building your empire, but instead, it is subsidizing your fear. There is a hidden physiological cost to this denial that goes beyond your wallet. Research shows that being in a scarcity mindset, which is the permanent state the ostrich effect keeps you in, can temporarily drop your effective IQ by as much as 13 points. When you avoid your bank statement, your brain spends a massive amount of background energy worrying about what might be there. This consumes your cognitive bandwidth, leaving you too exhausted to make smart, long-term decisions. You end up in a cycle of tunneling where you only focus on the next 24 hours because you're too afraid to look at the next 20 years. By refusing to look at the numbers, you are literally making yourself less capable of solving the problem. You are trading your intelligence for a false sense of peace. To reclaim your financial authority, you must dismantle the bias that prioritizes temporary comfort over long-term survival. We start by changing the language we use to describe our money. Instead of checking my balance, which sounds like a judgment or an interrogation, call it a systems audit. You are the sober architect reviewing a blueprint. If a building has a crack in the foundation, the architect doesn't feel ashamed. They simply identify the structural failure and create a plan to reinforce it. When you strip away the emotional narrative of failure or guilt, the numbers lose their power to hurt you. They become data points. And data is something you can manage. Data is the raw material of a secure future. The most effective way to kill the ostrich effect is through a habit called data confrontation. Set a recurring 15-minute appointment on your calendar every Saturday morning. This is the time when your logic is at its peak and you haven't been drained by a week of work decisions. Open every statement and look at every line item. Do not judge your past self for what you spent on Tuesday. Simply document where the money went. This exposure therapy desensitizes your brain to the fear. The more often you look, the less the amygdala fires, and the more the prefrontal cortex stays in control. You are training your nervous system to stay calm in the presence of raw data. You are teaching your brain that the truth is safer than the mystery. Building a frictionless financial future requires moving from reactive denial to intentional awareness. Once you have faced the data, use your moment of clarity to automate the defense. If you see a recurring charge you didn't know existed, cancel it immediately. If you see a high-interest debt, set up an automatic debt-crushing payment that leaves your account the day your paycheck arrives. The goal is to make the right decision once so that your future ostrich brain self doesn't have the opportunity to mess it up later. You are building a choice architecture that protects you from your own biology. You are creating a system where your wealth grows in spite of your occasional desire to hide from it. The wealthiest people are not those who never feel financial anxiety. They are those who refuse to let that anxiety dictate their actions. They recognize that the ostrich tax is too expensive to pay. By confronting your bank statement today, you are buying your future freedom. You are choosing the short-term discomfort of the truth over the long-term catastrophe of insolvency. Master the logic of the numbers, pull your head out of the sand, and start building a reality based on data, not fear. Consistency over emotional intensity. Clarity over mental convenience. Step out of the sand and start building something that lasts. The sober architect knows that the only way forward is through the numbers. Define your reality, or the numbers will define it for you. Think about the compounding power of awareness. Every time you refuse to look at a bill, you are adding a mental weight that slows down your career, your relationships, and your sleep. But every time you open that app with a steady hand, you are reinforcing your identity as a person in control. You are proving to yourself that you are bigger than your bank balance. This is the foundation of fiscal psychology. The belief that your worth is not the number on the screen, but your ability to face that number and move it in the right direction. The ostrich hides because it's afraid of being hunted. You aren't being hunted. You are the architect. And the blueprints are finally in your hands.